Okay, again, solving some more trig problems. Again, I'd write down all the variations of Pythagorean identity. They're right there, and I'll refer to them in a minute. Okay, so let's say we have a couple like these. I numbered them, and I wrote the answers already in green. So 1 minus cosine squared t. Now that, obviously, I'm going to even point to it. 1 minus cosine squared t equals sine squared, right? So this right here is pretty obvious. It changes to, where am I? Sine squared over sine, just 1. Canceled right out, nothing to it. Okay, let's look at this problem here. I have tan, which is pretty obvious, and I have 1 minus secant squared t. Well, let's see here. 1 minus negative tan squared theta. Do you see how it's just a rule? So if this changes to negative tan squared of t, of course I get negative 1. So this one's pretty easy. This one's pretty easy. Cosecant squared t minus 1. Let's see where it is. Cosecant squared minus 1 is cotan. Right. So if this changes to cotan squared of t times tan squared of t. Well, tan and cotan are inverses, so that's pretty clear. But even if it wasn't, let's just break it apart to what it really means. Okay, tan is definitely sine over cosine. Cotan is definitely cosine over sine, and 1 it is. Okay. Now I don't mean to rush you, but this is kind of the bad one. Not bad, but you got to think for a second. I know that 1 minus cosine squared t is going to be sine squared t. Okay, that was pretty obvious. What's not so obvious is that 1 plus cosine of t. Now, if you remember back to like imaginary numbers and complex conjugates, sometimes you have to eliminate the denominator by multiplying through by its conjugate. So 1 plus cosine of t, we're going to fix that by multiplying top and bottom, a special form of 1 minus cosine of t. 1 minus cosine of t. And what happens is we get, well, I don't have to do much, and I'll show you why for a second. Now when I multiply this down here, I get 1 times 1 is 1. These two, I get negative cosine of t. Inside, I get plus cosine of t. And the last, I get negative cosine squared of t. What happens here is this obviously eliminates, and I get 1 subtract cosine squared t. Well, we know that gives us sine squared of t, and that eliminates, and we're left with 1 subtract cosine of t. Okay, that one is a little bit more tricky, I understand that. This one right here, again, very obvious. 1 minus cosine squared t is going to be sine. So I have sine squared of t, cosine over sine is cotan, done. Secant squared t minus 1. It's not as obvious, but if you look back, let's see. I'll find it somewhere. Oh, here we go. Secant squared minus 1 is tan squared t. So this changes right to tan squared t over tan of t. 1 cancels out, so you're left with tan of t. Okay, so other than this one, I think those are pretty self-explanatory if you just look at these rules. Again, you're not going to memorize them right off, but over time, you know, I do this all the time, and I got to look back and forth too because I forget. But just be able to take the original and break apart and find all these variations will get you through most every problem. Okay, good job.